lovely to see so many of you here not staying to watch the football. I guess some of you might be here for football. Anyway, I'm Chris Dale. I'm a member of St Erth Methodist Church. Back in the spring, some of us, every Friday we have a Bible study group. And back in the spring, that group, we decided to follow a 6-week course from Christian Aid. And it was entitled Act on Poverty. And it was that, and that encouraged us to do just that. We thought, what can we do to act on poverty? Why not? We'll hold the hustings, all the candidates to talk to us about poverty, and for you to ask questions about that, but not to close it down to poverty. There will be other questions as well. And we thought, yeah, we'll do that in September before the autumn election. And then releasing that told us to bring it forward for a minute. And here we are. You can hear the strains of the band. I'm grateful to the band for moving their rehearsal from this room up to the chapel so that we can do this here. I think, I need to tell you fire exits. Over there and over there, I'll get you outside. The toilets out through that door and down to the corridor at the end. I think that's all I need to say. So I'm going to hand over now to Bill Coleman, who's the headmaster of St Erth School. He's going to chair the evening. Bill.
Thank you, Chris. So, Vivian asked me to chair the meeting, and I'm delighted to do so on behalf of the community. It's my first time chairing Hustings, gentlemen. I'm used to organising children more often, and I'm sure this will be a much more smoother ride. So the evening's agenda, we'll start in a moment with 2 minutes from each candidate on the subject of poverty. We'll then open to audience questions on poverty-related issues specifically. After that section, we'll move on to an opportunity for an open form for questions for candidates. I'll ensure that each candidate has a chance to respond to each question, and we'll move down the line in turn and then move through with each question that's given. So to introduce who we have here with us this evening, we have Ian Flindall, representing the Green Party, Andrew George for the Liberal Democrats, John Harris, representing the Common People, Dave Laity, who's an Independent, Derek Thomas, Conservative, and Jason Saunders from UKIP. So, without any further ado, I shall hand over to Ian Flindall, the man on my right, for his 2 minutes on poverty.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Ian Flindall, the parliamentary candidate for the Green Party. I joined the Green Party in 1979 because here was a party that realised that standard politics and economic effort and standard mantra was leading to unsustainable damage to the environment, unsustainable poor welfare and well-being for citizens, and unsustainably unfair wealth distribution. After many years of developing what we called a manifesto for a sustainable society, we realised that there is not a choice between looking after the environment and looking after people, their social and economic well-being. We can and must do both, because many of the policies needed to bring about a just and fair society will also protect the environment. Social justice and justice for the environment must go hand in hand. Over the intervening years, I believe there are elements of our ethos that have begun to be taken on board by some of the other parties, but not nearly enough, which is why the increasing support for the Green Party is vital in keeping the pressure up. Time is running out. As we speak, Mexico is on fire. People are losing homes. As we speak, Texaco is underwater. People are losing homes. The people in France, the French, obviously, are afeard of the fact that they might lose athletes in the heat, in the new raised temperatures that Paris is experiencing. And of course, you'll know that our farmers in this country were underwater for months in unusual flooding. And this will have knock-on effects later on in the harvest. And of course, causes of poverty are manifold, global, and some due to government ineptitude. We've got the cost of homes, buy or rent, cost of fuel, gas and electricity, cost of water and sewage, lack of decent job opportunity, local quality production being driven out by multinationals. You've got nearly, yeah, okay. Obviously, we need to be paying for improvements to this, and there's a double whammy because not only are we suffering from increased poverty, we're actually suffering from underfunding to our public services that we need. We're going to offer a new notion that's as old as the hills. Thank you.
Ian. Okay, on to Mr. Andrew George for the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you, Bill. Indeed, the widening injustice and the widening inequality in society was something which originally drew me into politics. Indeed, in the 1980s, and I was a campaigner with the World Development Movement and War on Want and others, and became very frustrated with those single-issue campaigns. How we were battering our head against brick walls in those days, and it was as a result of that, and my turning to my colleagues in those campaigns and saying, we can't carry on like this. Someone's got to do something, and they said to me, since you've got such a big mouth, why don't you put yourself up for election? It was and one thing led to another, and it drew me into becoming a parliamentary candidate and ultimately a member of Parliament for this area. And my abiding passion to combat the inequalities in society, both in this country and in the developing world, has always driven me in politics. And it's very concerning that in spite of everything and in spite of all of the efforts that we have made, that we're currently living in a country with significant widening inequality. And indeed, the United Kingdom is one of the most unequal places in the OECD. The top fifth of the population owns 63% of the wealth in this country. The bottom fifth own 0.5% of the wealth in this country, and it's getting worse, not better. And when you look, I run a charity that builds affordable homes, and and in contrast, in the last 10 years, over £500 million of taxpayers' money has gone into the pockets of holiday home owners, whilst we struggle to get the money necessary in order to build first homes for the people who desperately need it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. On to Mr. John Harris for the Common People.
I'm John Harris. I'm very pleased to be here. Poverty, you can address either locally or you can address it nationally. If you address it locally, then you can engage in poverty relief, but you can't do anything really to increase the amount of money that people have, especially if they're running on a minimum income or a low wage. That's only a function that national government can address. There are two things coming at the moment which are going to have a major effect on that. One is that jobs are going to start disappearing at a very rapid rate in the near future, and the other is that there will be food insecurity locally and nationally and across the world. This is the global warming, the climate change. And that, I would think, is going to affect a community like this more than most. Whilst you can try poverty alleviation, I'm not sure that you can have a great deal of an effect. I think what you're looking for is to put in a basic income that's available to everybody, that is no longer a benefit, but is actually something that is handed out as a central government thing to make sure that there is enough money for every household to be able to afford the essential items, to cover housing and to cover food, and to make sure that nobody is actually so stressed that their mental health is affected by it. those are the areas that I think I should try bringing up later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Mr. Dave Laity and Independent.
Good evening. I came to this race a bit late, only a couple of weeks ago. I've got an unusual set of skills, scientifically and problem solving. And a lot of people said, there's a lot of problems out there, why don't you have a go at it? So here I am. And I think the topic now is poverty. Well, I was brought up in the 60s, and my parents, one would work, and my mother would work for what she called pin money. And they managed to pay the mortgage, buy a house, and the pin money got them on holiday. We've now got more taxation, we've got better technology and better incomes than we've ever had before, and we find that two people are now working hard, pedalling hard, just to stay still or go backwards. What went wrong? Well, I was talking to a very good friend last night, and she said to me, I'll quote, "If you always do what you've always done, you will always get what you've always got." And for the last God knows how many years, we've always voted one of the three parties that have not really changed anything. I've not noticed any change. I've noticed poverty changing down here, more and more food banks, much more money going to the holiday trade but not to the locals, and there is an imbalance. I looked at it and I have schemes which I believe will solve the problems. There is enough money, it's just being very badly mismanaged. It's going to the wrong people, and we need more income, more funding here, and there is plenty. Don't you believe there's not enough? How many people here think they should pay more taxes? I'm sure nobody's going to raise their hand for that one. And I'm telling you, we've never paid more tax than we do now, and we're worse off than we have been for many, many years. Something is wrong. It needs readjusting. Everything needs rebalancing. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. On to Mr. Derek Thomas, Conservative.
Thank you. So my parents, I started life in Nigeria. My parents were missionaries. They worked with, my nurse was a nurse with leprosy patients. My dad made artificial limbs, we used to call in those days. And so I had a very good grounding in terms of how we care for and support the most vulnerable and the most people in the most challenging situations. I obviously grew up in Cornwall near Helston. My first job was I learnt to be a Cornish mason in the building trade, but soon after that I was doing some voluntary youth work in Porthleven, and I really recognised that there was a massive need to support young people, and I felt inadequate for it. So I then went and trained, came back and worked in Penzance in Chapel Street Methodist Church. I actually spent most of my time there working on Giane. During that time we set up the first Shore Start Centre in the country, and did what important work we felt to really support people in very early life. After that, I went to Helston and ran a charity for 8 years where we just supported both children but also people that are homeless and people with severe learning disabilities to have as much of an opportunity to or get the opportunities that they needed to have full lives. So I have understanding, and that's really what got me into politics, was how we fix some of these problems, as David's kind of identified, in a way that builds lives and builds opportunity. And I think if you look at breaking, if you like, the cycle of poverty and the cycle of deprivation, the cycle of challenges that parts of our this constituency have, and also significant numbers of families find over generations. I think the way we do that is really good support for that family unit, really good support for family units, really good support for the both voluntary and public sector. But also, so the government are doing this, what they call the first 1,000 days, early years work, and it's trying to make sure that parents have the real opportunity to start school and then support education right through to education and skills. But the way we really address poverty in the West Cornwall, where it is to give people the skills and the opportunities they need to get lifelong jobs. I did that as a Cornish mason. I may well find that I need my tools again in the near future. But giving someone a trade and opportunity and to feel fulfilled in their lives is something that you can never take away from them. And I think that's how we really address challenges that we are discussing tonight.
And finally, Mr. Jason Saunders from the UKIP.
Good evening. Thank you for having me here tonight. I'm Jason Saunders, and I'm actually a candidate for UKIP. My first time I've actually standing as a candidate. The subject tonight is poverty. I've actually written in brief of what I'm going to say tonight, so bear with me a second. When Right, charity begins at home. Investing in food banks, which I believe is deepest regrettable, that therefore that every increasing demand for food banks in our 21st century in Britain. If those who attend food banks are in such dire straits and they are in need of food handouts, it is a high likelihood that they will also need additional support to deal with issues such as debt, family breakdown, addiction, poor and physical and mental health. Many will need employment or legal advice. We will therefore contribute to the important work done by food banks and develop them into a community advice centre for those most in need. The manifesto of UKIP, they actually state in the manifesto what they would do. The party will train and fund the cost of 2,500 advisors to work in 2,500 food banks, so the poorest in our society have free and easy access to timely help. That's right for me. To help their hour in need.
2 minutes. Thank you very much, Jason. Thank you. So now over to the audience for any questions they have which are related specifically to our topic tonight of poverty. Yes, ma'am.
I've got one. So, from an education standpoint, you say that poverty should start with...
Sorry, can you speak up? Sorry.
From a poverty standpoint, you say that you should help children at their earliest. I work in education, I work at the local nursery, and I have seen firsthand how we have stripped back services from the earliest intervention, and there is now no support for us in education to give those children the best start that they've got in life. What do you say to that?
We'll start with Andy Jordan and work down the line and come back to Ian.
Okay. Very good question, and this is a very serious issue, and certainly one which is affecting, all schools in the area, and all those who work in education tell me the same. I have a brother and sister who work in primary education themselves at the front line, at the chalk face, as it were, and what they're saying is that resources in the classroom have certainly significantly reduced, particularly concern about those children that need additional help through SEN, the inadequate SEN budgets and inadequate support for schools to be able to provide the additional support which had been available in the past. And what particularly frustrates me is that although I'm not criticising the individuals themselves, but we have a system now which is built on this kind of private sector model of wanting larger academy trusts, where those at the very top are being paid very handsomely indeed, and who are not necessarily fully aware of what's going on or the consequences of what's going on within the classroom itself. They're more remote, higher paid, and out of touch. And if we strip that top layer and went back to where we had been previously, putting those resources instead of into senior management and top exec pay into frontline service, frontline teaching, then I think that would be the first. The first step on the road to addressing the issue. But we also need to put additional funding into education as well. And so the Liberal Democrats have a costed manifesto of taxing, for example, the digital companies that are getting away with a great deal, and indeed others, to provide the support necessary within the classroom, particularly for those that are particularly vulnerable, and also to commit ourselves to above inflation increases across the board. I mean, Cornwall is particularly underfunded in comparison with other areas. And what we need is a strong voice in Westminster to argue that Cornwall is getting its fair share for education funding and it gets to the front line.
Move on to John Harris for the Common People on the same point about funding being stripped back.
As Andrew says, this is a Westminster problem. This isn't, I think, something that you can address locally at all. If you have a policy of trimming down public services to the point where there's full capacity and you don't have any spare and you're working everybody flat out, then you are not going to have the slack that you need. You need a capacity for additional things to be brought in. You need to be able to choose to do things within the school that don't involve just running all the time. I can't think that there's anything else you can do other than get additional funding in, and to do that you need to find a government which is not constantly focused all the while on bringing down public finance. I know that's as far as it goes. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Dave Laity.
Thank you. As Andrew alluded to, it's an imbalance. There's masses of money around and it's going to the top people who are not necessarily in contact with us. Even down here, they're not in contact with the grassroots level. I think we need to put a balance back in. What I am hearing is we need to throw money at different systems for support, to support a system. Are we not supporting a broken system? The problem is the system is broken. We need to fix it first, and then we can give it more support. Funding is how we're going to do that. But the funding in the corporate world, if you look, everything is a corporation. I looked today, even UKIP's a corporation. Mr Farage is a 52% owner. I mean, reform. Sorry, not see, I beg your pardon. Sorry. That's because he changed sides. Reform UK. It's on Companies House. I've got the document here, and I'm thinking, why a corporation? Are we not heading towards corporate governance, which is money for people at the top echelons of society at the expense of us down here? We do not need corporations running us. We need local government. We need local people with local ideas to solve the local problems. And those local problems can then be allianced with other local problems. We could form an alliance instead of a party policy which is all blanket, because our area down here is totally unique. It's even unique to other areas in Cornwall, let alone the rest of the country. So governance from somewhere where they have no clue. I mean, we've got people who come down here making decisions from London who come down here on holiday. And I won't mention any names, but I think you'll know who I mean. I mean, this is a ridiculous situation where you need local people who've actually assessed and lived through the local problems to know what needs fixing and then fix the problem. Funding is not always the answer from the top down. The funding needs to be in the bottom up. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I recognise exactly what you've said. I don't recognise necessarily David Andrews' point about the criticising the trust in the way that they have. So True and Penwith Academy Trust, I think they actually do a very good job. And the purpose of them, I helped get involved in Penwith Educational Trust. Sorry, yeah.
Would you mind speaking a little bit more slowly?
Yeah, sure, I will. So I'm conscious. Yeah.
Sometimes full stops.
I think we're aware of the time. Sorry about that. So some time ago when I was a governor, we worked together and set up the Penwith Education Trust. That was an example of how you could actually pool resources and buy stuff more competitively. I think new multi-academies can do that. There's always been top slicing in education. I mean, whether it's whether local authority or not. Sorry, but I think where what we've the baseline has improved. So the funding that each child gets from the state. There's a funding formula that is supposed to iron out the unfairness across the country. The urban areas were getting a lot more funding, rural areas not so. That has been, over time, been correcting. So Cornwall, the baseline funding now is much closer to the urban areas across the country. In fact, if you were speaking to Devon, they would argue that Cornwall's better funded than they are. But I think what we haven't properly allowed for or understood, and I'm talking about Education Department and those that set the funds, is how much money is needed that never gets anywhere near frontline teaching. And I'm talking about the buildings, I'm talking about even things like business rates and VAT and all sorts of other things. National insurance contributions have gone up, pension contributions have gone up massively. I expect, Bill, that would be experience you've had within your school. And so a lot of money that we believe is intended for frontline teaching is actually being understandably absorbed elsewhere in the system. And that does...
Off our school.
Sorry?
Money going into buildings helps to teach our children.
Sorry,
The roof is falling off our schools.
Yeah. So I wasn't talking about the fabric of the building.
I'm talking about the practicality of what's happening now.
I apologise for that. I'm not, sorry, I didn't make myself clear. I'm not talking about the fabric of the building, I'm talking about energy costs and the running costs of buildings. That's where there's a real challenge. So I absolutely accept your point. What we absolutely must continue to do is provide a really high standard of education, which we do in Cornwall. And I have, because there's some brilliant teachers locally, head teachers that understand funding and finance, I've met with them regularly and taken that argument to Westminster over and over and again. And we have seen some improvements, but it's the constant money that is just goes elsewhere and never gets into the classroom. That needs to be properly addressed.
Thank you. Jason Saunders.
Right, I don't know the answer to that question, what was raised, but I will look into it more. Okay.
Thank you. Ian Flindall, Green.
That's a really important question. My wife was a teacher, in fact a head teacher locally, and the pressure on education staff is criminal, let alone Ofsted. Let's leave that out for a minute. The first mistake we made was to allow schools or encourage schools to get into a private sort of setting in the academies, because that doubles the amount of autocracy going on, not technicality going on, because you've got a client side and a contract side between the local authorities and the schools. Schools never had to worry about anything other than teaching. Now they have to be architects, surveyors, plumbers, electricians, you name it. They have to get into all of that because that central resource has been lost. So we need, obviously, to spend more money. I'm sorry, a lot of the answers tonight are going to be spending more money, which means raising tax. But we need to spend more money on the capital situation in schools, and particularly the concrete issues, but lots of others. We want to spend £13 billion a year for 5 years, and an extra £9 billion a year on revenue funding to help with supporting teachers and the rest of the staff. You can't get away from it. We've underfunded education, and it's one of the most important things we can be redressing. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more questions for you in relation to poverty? Yes, the lady down there.
Yes, I'd like to hear from all the candidates, just straightforwardly, given that Giane has said we need more money in the system, what do you think of a wealth tax? And by a wealth tax, I mean what Oxfam recommends, polluters pay the highest taxation. Eisenhower had a wealth tax, 99%, 96%. 77% of Conservative voters support a wealth tax. I want to hear straightforwardly, wealth tax. What do you think of it?
And this time I'll start with John Harris from the Common People.
I don't know how much that would bring in. So that's the thing that I would need to find out. Are you talking about, suddenly the government's got half as much money again, or are you saying we've just put the government funding up by 5%? It's either a major contributor or it's not. There must be ways of getting money, whether they involve looking to the rich or whether they involve what they usually do, which is taking more money away from the poor, or whether you can actually get it from corporate sources. I would hope you could actually take it from companies. When you get to what used to be the public utilities, they are all handing out dividend payments to their shareholders. And that, I think, is a place where you can go and get money back into the system. I don't think any dividend payment should go out from any of a class of companies. And you say, you're a water company, you cannot do that anymore. And you say to whatever it may be, because they are effectively monopoly suppliers. And the fact that you can choose between all these electric energy companies does not stop the fact that 5% of what you're handing over to them is going away as a dividend payment to their shareholders. I'd probably draw the line at supermarkets, but I'd think about it first.
Thank you. On to Dave Laity.
Well, I think a wealth tax is possibly the way to go, but is it not too late by the time you have to tax the wealthy? They've already had the money and they're finding loopholes to put it away offshore, etc. We're finding that all the time. There are far too many people paid far too much money for doing far too little, and it's filtering down to us. As I said earlier on in the introduction, I believe there's plenty of money in the kitty nationally, it's just misappropriated. And if we cut out these corporates, we're being run by corporations. Did you know that the national grid is sold? Our government sold it years ago. It doesn't belong to us anymore. It was sold, but we've retained the right to decommission all power stations. Yet a French company has benefited from buying our national grid, for instance. Corporates, the phenomenal pay that these corporate heads are getting. Last year, the top 10 earners in Cornwall Council earned just under £1.4 million between them, 10 people. It's obscene money. It's obscene. We do need to address the wealthy, but when they've got to a wealth tax situation, I believe it's maybe too late. We need to address it further down the chain and cut out the massive corporate funding through dividends in their shares. We do need investment, but there's got to be a cap on it somewhere. We can't keep going the way we're going. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On to Derek Thomas, Conservative.
Thank you for that. The problem is, and David's right, what we actually need to do is simplify the tax system. The problem we do have at the moment is every time we change the high rate threshold for tax, the government collects less, and it's just because we have very clever accountants that are paid an awful lot more than HMRC accountants that find ways around it. So we have to simplify tax in order to close those loopholes. We have to make sure that people believe that living in the UK and paying the kind of tax you're talking about is both attractive but also morally correct to do. And there are Formula One racing drivers who live in this country but live on yachts in order to avoid paying, and can legally do that. We have to address that. But I think so Theresa May, in her time as Prime Minister, she introduced some draft legislation that would have capped the highest earner in a business 13 times. They could earn no more than 13 times the lowest earner. Now, what that would have done is raised up the wages of the majority of the company and actually really managed the wages of the top. It is, David's right, the extraordinary pay of senior public servants is shocking. It's far more than a lot of the private sector. But I think the issue of tax is always, how do you make sure you continue to collect tax? And also, how do you attract people into the country, the best brains, the best minds, to actually create the wealth that then can be distributed through workforces and through the people that live and work here. It's a really, really tricky situation. I think every political party, whichever colour, has tried to address it, but you see this issue of sometimes trying to do the right thing but raising less tax as a result.
Thank you, Dan. On to Jason Saunders, UKIP.
With taxation, I think we should have just a flat rate taxation of 27%. And obviously, that's up to, if anybody earns over 20,000, up to 20,000. That's my belief anyway.
Lovely, thank you, Jason. On to Ian Flindall, Green.
Well, it's essentially a fairly simple question. Earned income shouldn't be taxed. Unearned income should be heavily taxed. And we're talking about taxing the wealthy. If you have assets more than £10 million, you should be looking to pay more tax. If you've got billions of pounds, you need to be looking at paying quite a lot more tax. And that's the essence, I hope, of the answer to your question.
And Andrew George, Liberal Democrat.
Well, as I said in my opening remarks, 2/3 of the wealth of this country is held by the top fifth of the population. I mean, that is unacceptable. It's unjustifiable, and it places us in a league almost of our own in terms of inequality. And there are further injustices. I mean, to hear that from Derek a moment ago that it is pointless trying to raise taxes off the wealthy because they'll find tax lawyers to get around it. I mean, it doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't keep trying to combat the inequality in this country. It doesn't mean that we should turn a blind eye to it. I remember when I was up, we were looking at, for example, the welfare cap, saying, well, it's reasonable for any government to put a cap on unreasonably large requests for taxpayer-funded support. Okay, let's say we all agree with that principle. We have to look at that. Well, if that's the case for the poor, then we also need to address putting a cap on taxpayer-funded payments to large farmers and landowners. I mean, I mentioned a moment ago the unacceptability of £500 million of taxpayers' money going through tax loopholes and indeed COVID aid to holiday homeowners in Cornwall in the last 10 years. John mentioned a moment ago. I mean, £74 billion of water company money that we pay to them hasn't gone in the infrastructure, it's gone to line the pockets of the shareholders and the top execs. You know, we cannot carry on like this. It's a massively unequal society and country, and we do need to address these issues. And so yes, I think we do need to look at a wealth tax. And I know that when we were in government during that short while, we were floating the idea of putting further bans in the council tax system. Some people called it a mansion tax. But the fact is, we do need to review the way in which people with very large amounts of wealth, you know, these people who have the 2/3 of the wealth of this country, can make a better contribution towards what we need in order to function as a society. And certainly we need to close the tax loopholes. I mean, we can see the tax loophole going to holiday homeowners. It should have been closed 10 years ago when I first blew the whistle on it. And they're still talking about doing it. Oh, we'll do it. We're going to consult over it. I mean, why do you need to consult? Just close it. You know, get on and do it. And this should have happened 10 years ago, but instead £500 million has gone. When in fact that money should have gone to first homes for local people, helping people who actually need the money. I mean, it's like rewarding the wealthy for underusing their second homes, and then at the same time they bring in a bedroom tax to penalise the poorest because they say that they underutilise their council house. So we do need to address these inequalities. You're absolutely right.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, I went on.
Any further questions from the audience on poverty? If the lady in the front
Can I bring back to the original question about teachers and teachers being very excellent, which of course they absolutely are. I have a daughter who's a primary school teacher in the area, and I understand that the school, which has a lot of second homes in the area, so the school's actually becoming depleted, that they're losing, or they are going to lose, 50% of their TAs, who are not qualified teachers, but are an essential part of the service that the teachers can then provide. And I just wonder, and again, I think second homes also have that impact as well on the local community, with children who are very needy to let, who can't rely just on having the excellent teachers, which is missing.
So it's like Standard Days Lexi in response to that.
Very good question.
John, sorry, John last time.
John. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, and it's a little bit more complex than that. I've been a school governor for 3 schools in the past. I brought up 8 children in this area into grown-ups, and I'm a grandparent now of 10. So I've got a lot of contact with the schools, and my daughter, my second eldest daughter, is a teacher in the area. And yes, the things that you are saying are actually factual. They are losing staff because they can't afford to live in the area. I've been looking at this, as I said at the beginning, I came to this battle late, but I'm a problem solver. I'm an ex-scientist and an ex-police detective. So I look at a problem and try and solve it. And in looking at this problem, I found out this last week, there are 5 schemes in this county where up to 50% discounts are offered on houses by the county to the over 60s. Is that not taking away from the younger generation?
Yeah.
That is really impacting on it. We went to Mosul a couple of nights ago and spoke to lots and lots of residents there. There's one street with 17 houses that were empty, holiday homes. The problem now is that those holiday homes, they can't rent them because the service charges are up to £300 a week to change over. So people can't afford them, they'd rather go abroad. So we are now left with masses and masses of empty homes. That's just one example. The whole place was, the residents reckon that Mosul is now 70% holiday homes. We can't stop holiday homes, it's a right. People have a right to buy what they have, and if they've earned the money, they want to buy a house. But what we can do is we can take the revenue from that property, the council tax, and put it into the local housing and subsidise the local housing from that tax. That will give our youngsters the ability to stay in the area and do the jobs in the area if they so wish. And those jobs will then service the holiday industry, and we will have the money go around and keep the money in county rather than it clearing off out the county.
Derek Thomas.
First, on that point about older people, the policy that Dave's referring to, and we had it when I was at Penrith District Council, is trying to incentivise people that live in family homes, family-sized homes, to downsize to actually release homes for families. So while it may seem unfair, we do need to encourage people, and it's a tough thing when you get older, to leave the home that you raise your children in, to move into a house so that that house can be released for someone else. In terms of what... So I did a lot of work in Coverack when we had that very situation where the school was threatened with closure. And when we looked at why that was, I worked with Sutherly Point, that was the trust at the time, and the community and the parish council. It clearly was the number of families living in the area just couldn't justify that school staying open. Now, we managed to get that decision reversed, and as far as I'm concerned, I think that's I don't know anything at the moment that suggests that that is at risk. But at the time, when working with Cornwall Council, I met with the planners there, but also with the local parish council. At the time there was lots of plans to build homes, family homes that would be protected indefinitely for permanent people to live in permanently. But there was some resistance locally. So we did quite a bit of work, and homes are being built across the Lizard to address some of the problems you've quite rightly identified. In terms of legislation, the council now can identify holiday lets and make sure they are being used for that purpose. If they're not, they lose the opportunity to be registered as businesses, and then they pay double council tax if they're not lived in permanently. Also, the council have the opportunity going forward to, if you were to leave your home and someone else wants to buy it as a second home or a holiday let, they would have to go, the council have the tools now, they could go to the council and the council could impose a planning clause that would mean that the council could say, actually, no, Coverack, Mousel, Porthleven, St Ives has the wrong ratio of the wrong balance of homes that are permanently lived in and not and lived in at all. St Ives led the way with the 8-2 for their neighbourhood plan, where they basically said no new homes, all new homes had to be for permanent residents. The government had the opportunity to block that if they didn't support it, but they didn't. They supported it, I supported it, and that became law for St Ives. And now that tool has been rolled across for the council to use across the whole of Cornwall and anywhere else where there's a particular problem. Housing is a really complex issue. The thing that gets me absolutely infuriated, and it's not been mentioned once in any of the hustings we've had, is that when you go and deliver leaflets, you come across empty home after empty home, and these are not holiday lets, they're not second homes, they have just been abandoned. We have to really turn on whatever energy we have, use the powers that Cornwall Council have, identify the owners, which we can do, and get these homes, do what we can to get these homes back into use. And I know that in all the small communities where the problem that you've identified is real, there are empty homes that aren't lived in. It's very easy to attack second homes. It's easy to attack the holiday let industry. We must get on and use the homes that are already built and are empty, because actually, if we don't do that, we carve up more fields around St Erth to build homes. And that just is not necessary every time.
Thank you.
Well,
I was thinking, what about
yeah.
literally just a short walkway?
I can answer.
It's incredible. There's 10 properties. They've been sitting there empty for years.
Mr. George might want to address that because I know he's had some involvement in that.
I think we'll continue.
You're not good there. Not a negative, not negatively.
I would say it's the council's fault with not checking up on these houses being empty, and it's.
Well, they have the powers to do it.
They have. Well, not a very good job.
Impact upon local education and schools and their sustainability, and that being impacted by the rise in second homes.
Should we just deal with these empty homes though? Because it is definitely a real problem. It can be quite quick.
We can't say in the open questions.
Okay,
so
fine. Sure, thanks.
So, Jason, can we come to you, please?
Well, the lack of teachers, is that what we lost?
The sustainability of schools and that being impacted by the rise in second homes, the lack of local families visiting them.
It's a lack of everything, really, isn't it? It's a lack of... it's employment, basically. Employment, it could be a variety of things. Employment, government spending, obviously, they haven't put enough into it. Council spending. To me, it's many things.
Thank you, Jason. And over to Ian.
Fundamentally, you're talking about the increasing unviability of schools as as the population decreases, as the local population decreases. My son and daughter-in-law had friends, one of whom was a skilled tree surgeon, the other one was a senior local nurse. They looked for somewhere to live in West Penwith for 18 months and finally had to move to Yorkshire where they could find somewhere. That is hollowing out communities, and it's because we're allowing properties to be investment opportunities. No one should be able to buy a second home and leave it as an investment, which is what's happening. There are actually two on our little farm. One went for 1.5 million and the other one is probably worth more on the open market. Nobody locally can afford that sort of thing, so we've got nobody living in those houses for most of the time. So we need stronger action at government level to stop the ability of people to have a couple of £1 million, bonus in London and then invest in property in Cornwall. I mean, it's ludicrous that we allow it. And it seems draconian, but we cannot allow second homes to be an investment proposition while people haven't got first homes. And without first homes, we don't have a community to get to your school. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. On to Andrew George.
Thank you very much. This is very much at the core of many problems, not just to address the housing needs of TAs in schools. I mean, the injustice going on is very evident. And so, I've been campaigning for many years for a change in the planning system to secure so that anyone applies for any non-permanent occupancy. The government has proposed that it purely applies to holiday homes, which means that people can buy them and convert them to second homes, and they don't need planning permission. So there's an easy loophole way around that particular proposal. What you need is to have one which is that you need to apply for planning permission for non-permanent occupancy. So it'd be a second home, a holiday home, any other home. So it's a very weak system, and that's probably one which they've been kind of shamed into addressing because we've been campaigning on this for many years, and it is fracturing many communities like those here in West Cornwall, indeed on the Isles of Scilly. And I've already talked about the injustices and the way in which the tax system works. What is fundamentally happening is that the planning system is fueled by greed rather than need. Ian quite rightly says that we should tax unearned income, and it's always been my view that when you convert a property from agricultural value to open market housing, that significant increase in the valuation of that land has been created by society having a planning system, and it's taken advantage of by those people who can bamboozle planning committees and get their planning permissions through. So there's a justification for a significant level of taxation on the unearned element of that kind of lottery win, which is available to people who can navigate their way through the planning system. And what's happened in Cornwall is it's one of the fastest growing places in the United Kingdom. So our housing stock has almost trebled in the last 60 years. And we're told that actually there is a relationship between house building and meeting housing need. Well, Cornwall is the classic example where that has failed. So we've had an almost trebling of housing stock, and yet the housing problems of locals have got significantly worse. So the issue is not simply building houses, it's building the right houses and making sure that they're available for local people in perpetuity and protected with covenants and 106 agreements and others. And the problem that we have with far too many developments where planning permission have passed, and indeed this is the 10 houses down the road which were passed by the Conservative government on appeal, is that you end up with a situation where actually the unviability of that scheme is ultimately exposed. And although I work for a charity that has tried to rescue that particular scheme, and now I see I'm being pilloried for it by the I think there was an attempt. I think there was an attempt to try and make a point, which was, I think, rather a bit of skullduggery going on there. But anyway, there we are. But the fact is that whilst I try to rescue that scheme, and that is of course down to a private developer and trying to persuade a private developer to do the right thing. Well, a charity cannot force a private developer to do the right thing, and they will always go for what they think is going to give them the best price, rather than as we were, and I can't say too much because a lot of it is commercial confidentiality, but to convert that from open market homes there into affordable homes for locals, which is what we actually needed for local people in that development. But there are many other schemes in which we can deliver what the local people need. But fundamentally, there is a significant weakness in the way in which the planning system works. And when Cornwall's local plan was last reviewed, the 2020 to 2030 local plan, in which we're obliged to build 52,500 houses, which was imposed by central government at the time, the Conservative government told us that we had to increase it by another 7,500 to address the growing demand for second homes in Cornwall. And that's one of the problems which we have. That should be discounted, and indeed, and we need to put a cap on it, and to give local first time, those who need first homes, a priority, and they're not given a priority in the way the system works.
Thank you very much. On to John Harris.
There's an attempt here to isolate a certain number of homes and say these are protected for local people, as opposed to recognising that house prices in general have skyrocketed. They have become investments rather than places to live. And if you can turn that about and actually halve the cost of houses in general, then the people with the current low incomes that you have in Cornwall will start to be able to buy houses again. I expect that will be a very unpopular thing to suggest to people, though, because an awful lot of them own their houses and they would not like to see their equity going down. Other than that, I don't think I have any way of changing the age imbalance that you're getting from people retiring down here and people coming down here because they have the money and they can afford to buy housing here. And those who have grown up locally, they're the ones with the families, they're the ones sending children to school, and they are the ones who are having to move out because they don't have the ability to get a well-paid job. I don't know whether that's a solution or not, but it's part of it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Given the time now, I think we'll move on to the next part of the evening, which is open questions, general questions from the audience that have to be poverty related as such. If there are any more questions which are poverty related, of course, we'll take those as well. So, if anyone else like to ask a question? Lady over here.
I just have to really quickly note that I'm quite pleased that the ballot paper is more than right to a certain age when we actually get to polling day. But my question is related to shared prosperity funding that is careering towards the end of its term, and that's calculated per region according to deprivation in the area, and it was per person. So Cornwall had £145 per person because of the recognised deprivation in our county. Devon, our neighbour, had £9 per person. The county that has the most deprived town in Britain had £8 per person. So it's really clear that the deprivation in our county is absolutely not a single issue problem. It's also really clear that we're being really let down and left behind by central government. So I'd like to hear more about how we are going to be caught up with the rest of the country with it, as people have referred to as a Westminster problem.
Okay, I think we're starting with Derek Thomas this time.
Yeah, thank you for that. Can I just say, just to clarify, and apologise to Andrew if needed, on the housing, I was aware that CLT, Cornwall Land Trust, had been involved in that, but it wasn't for me, because I knew there were some sensitivities around it, to say how. That's why I referred to asking you. It wasn't at all a derogatory comment.
People have witnessed the way in which you were trying to...
Well, it just isn't. But to answer your question, so what you're saying about shared prosperity is in theory correct. Actually, what happened following Brexit, leaving the EU, was that Cornwall was promised by a number of people, Michael Gove, Boris and others, that Cornwall would continue the level of funding they'd had from the EU back to the previous 5 years. And so that's how we got to the 132 million that came to Cornwall, which, you're right, was the highest of any area in the country. And that was something that the 6 MPs, within days after the referendum, managed to get David Liddicoat, who was the Deputy Prime Minister, get him to commit to. So actually, there was not on these shared prosperity of Cornwall. It wasn't so much about it wasn't so much then about where Cornwall was in deprivation. It was more about maintaining what we'd been getting through via Europe at the time. When we're going, yeah, but you're going back. You're going back to some time ago. I'm certainly not disagreeing that there is. I said right at the very beginning, I spent many years of my life working on Giane with some really difficult circumstances that people grow up in and live in, and over generations have to manage. We did some really excellent work with an organisation they're called from America, actually, Friends of the Family, where you actually work with the family for a number of years to try and address some of those challenges. Also in Helston, I did a similar thing. So I to be fair, what the question isn't the level of deprivation. The question is, any deprivation is not acceptable, and we should work hard to address it. That's why I think, if you look at the early years work that's been doing now, the first 1,000 days, and the really intensive forensic work that Cornwall is one of the pilots of this government initiative, is to really look at exactly where the problem lies and really support that family, and everything from speech and language therapy to good nutritious diet to learning to cook at home, know how to do those things. It needs that investment in. When David Cameron launched, for example, the Troubled Families Fund, which is a massive amount of money that was designed to support a family right through to when those children are in their 20s. It will take time to break that cycle and address the poverty. I'm on the the Food Environment Rural Affairs Select Committee, and we did a lot of work on hunger, and I absolutely think this government need a Minister for Hunger that looks at food availability, where food is, where it's being wasted, where it's not getting the kind of nutrition in food, and making sure we address hunger so that this country can completely eliminate hunger. It is possible. We've already said there's enough around. It's just not getting to where it's most needed. And I've worked on initiatives in Cornwall. Hive would be one of them, where we actually have managed to address some of those challenges.
Thank you very much. And Jason Saunders.
The second question. I lost the question.
Shared prosperity demonstrates how poor Cornwall is, and how do we address it?
We can address it quite easy. My concentration is mainly on our farming. We need to boost our farming up. That's my personal opinion of fisheries we need to boost up on, and basically employment. That's the only way we're going to get through this.
Chairman, can I make a suggestion that obviously it's up for grabs, but that instead of every single question being answered by every single member of the panel, we actually are allowed to address single questions to single individuals on the panel?
I think if I change that tack halfway through the meeting, then I would
Because
be
it's quite clear
I
that
take
some
your
of
point,
these
sir.
questions are not really...
I take your point, sir. I do. But equally, I start with the methodology. I'll continue with that to ensure that I'm being fair to everyone who's present and giving their time to be present. Should they wish not to answer a question, then they're very welcome to pass on to the next person. Okay?
And I think I'd like to reiterate that I would like to hear everybody's answer based on my question.
I think the Electoral Commission say that has to be the way it's done. So we haven't got a choice on that, I'm afraid.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Jason, you... Actually, hold your comments, sir. Thank you. On to Ian.
A fact that was overlooked at the time is that Cornwall was recognised as a deprived area by all 27 countries in Europe. And a sum was set aside annually, I think, I might be corrected on this, of £600 million to try and bring Cornwall back up into the normal sphere of wealth. When we came out of Europe, we lost that, and Derek, I think, says we replaced some of it, but nothing like what was recognised.
Yeah.
And so we've not only lost that funding, we've lost the opportunities for our youth, both coming to us and going there. And if you couple that with the housing situation where people can't afford to live here, we're losing communities of local people. So, you know, we can't generate the wealth locally, and we've got to address that problem urgently. And I've got views about how we can stop money leaching from the county through things like the electricity and gas companies, through the supermarkets, through anything you'll go out and buy. If you're not careful, you're putting profit into people's pockets out of the county. You've got to start thinking about a circular economy locally. So we can produce things locally, consume them locally, and not let the profits disappear.
Would it not be better to go back to the rural district officers directly?
Well, another next candidate to answer the question. I'll come to you in a moment.
Okay. So thank you. I mean, as Ian said, what replaced it is nothing like the amount of funding that was available from the European Union to Cornwall. And I was one of those MPs at the time that fought hard not only for the statistical disaggregation of Cornwall from Devon and Somerset in order for the very unique and challenging circumstances that Cornwall experienced, in order to secure what was then known as Objective 1 status. So we received the top level of European regional aid. And as a result of coming out of Europe, we were promised the equivalents. What they failed to properly understand is that on top of the £500 million that was coming in, or the 600 million in the latter programme coming into Cornwall of European aid, all of that had to be matched by UK and local and charitable and private sector contributions. And so the leverage of that money was levering in national money. We're just about getting the national money that we were going to get in as the leverage money to match the European aid. So we're significantly worse off than we were previously. I mean, the contrast with other parts of the country is something which is a matter for any nation state to address. And in those days, because Cornwall was getting additional European aid, the government was able to assist a little bit more in Devon and other places, and so there was a way of kind of evening the issues out. But what has happened since is that the government has gone through processes of both competition for aid into particular towns, and also using methodologies which would favour, strangely enough, Conservative marginal constituencies with town deal money. Now, I'm not against St Ives and Penzance getting the town deal money, I'm very much in favour of it. But it was just interesting that it was announced just before the last general election in lots of marginal Tory constituencies. And the formula used seemed to be strangely favour those areas in a way that... But what we need to do is we need to take the allocation of funds away from party politics in the way that it has been in recent years. Because the beauty of the European Union system was that was a very strictly statistical, very cold statistical base on which those decisions were made. And so it's vitally important that when we go forward, we actually have a very objectivised method of providing assistance to those regions that particularly need it.
Thank you very much. John Harris.
Thank you. I think if anybody can manage to persuade the Treasury to go back to that sort of scheme, I would be delighted. But I'm not sure any MP in any particular district is even going to get through the door when it comes to talking to the Treasury. I mean, you would know better than I. Fair enough.
I do know.
Catching up economically because of what was taken away and the shared prosperity. The whole country is suffering from this. This is not a Cornwall problem. This is a national problem that we have suddenly lost a great deal of economic activity because we do not have all the things that were going on before. Was it Mr. Cameron, I think? Yes, well, it stands to reason. Somebody mentioned Theresa May saying, let's manage to reduce the wealth gap across individual countries to 1 to 13. I mean, if you bring it down to 1 to 4, you can start possibly to look at it. That's just in money terms. But if you're looking at disposable income and somebody is earning 4 times more than one person, then it's not that they are 4 times better off, they're 16 times better off. It's a square relationship. You deal with all of your costs and suddenly you've got lots more money left instead of just a very little bit of money left. The wealth gap between Cornwall and the rest of the country is not the same as you have as a wealth gap between poor people and rich people. You're trying to bring in a little bit instead of actually narrowing everything down. The Common People's suggestion is that you bring in a universal basic income, and from that people can work and get additional money, but suddenly you don't have to get paid so much for it to make a difference. I would put that forward as a possible way. But it's not Cornwall related. Cornwall, I've no idea how you would talk anybody in London to wanting to do anything. As far as I remember it, you have had promises and promises and promises coming out, and when the Treasury gets to the point where they've ticked off all the things on the list, it's dropped off the end. And I don't see that would change necessarily, even if you were to get an alternative government at this point. It's how it works up in London. Thank you.
Thank you. Dave Laity.
As this lady said, the money thing, it seems to me to be a temporary thing. They throw money at the problem rather than solving it, and it diminishes. And as you quite rightly said, some people were in areas of getting £8. That's not going to solve the problem, is it? It's not going to solve it. I'm going to talk not as a politician, but as a problem solver, which is what I've done all my life. And I'm looking at how we can solve these issues here in Cornwall, not in Westminster, but here in Cornwall. So I've been doing a bit of investigation. The first thing, it's all linked into everything that everyone else is saying. For instance, one lady in one village that we were talking to whilst we were doing leaflets, a local who's been there 40 odd years, said that all the council houses have been sold off cheap to the elderly people who lived in them. Okay. The problem is when they pass away, there's inheritance tax to pay. And if they've got offspring, they can't afford the price of that house on the open market. So those houses are now being bought up as second homes. So there's one thing that we could look at. I don't know yet how far we can go into that. As I said, I'm a problem solver and I'll come to that. The other thing about the money, I've currently downloaded some accounts from Cornwall Council on, from
publicly available, okay, but when you start breaking them down,
There's quite a few horror stories there, and this comes as a complaint from a man who contacted me as a result of my going around in the community. His brother-in-law 10 years ago was boasting to him that he was being paid nearly £1,000 a day by Cornwall Council for IT being outsourced to him in Bedford. So I've looked at that particular company, and it would appear, this is information, and as a detective I have to discriminate between information and evidence, that what I'm finding is information that suggests that the county is paying, and has been for many years, £800,000 a month for outsourcing of IT consultancy. Why is that not in Cornwall? Why not? £800,000 spent on the youngsters in Cornwall who are just as capable. 5 years ago, I decided to do a degree. I went to Falmouth University and graduated in 2020 with a degree. And I mixed with hundreds of youngsters at my age. I was 59 when I started that. And they are more than capable. That is the 5th best university in the world for what it does, television and film. The 5th, ranked the 5th in the world. So why is that money not being invested down here for those people? And that is another one of the problems that I'm investigating. That is not the answer, it's not the end all, but there are so many things like that that are wrong with the system. They all need fixing at grassroots level, not throw money at it on a temporary basis. That money needs to be fixing the problem here and now. Thank you.
We have time for more questions.
You've talked a great deal about the need for housing. That's fine. Here in St Erth we've got not only the notorious 10 houses over there, but 2 other developments going on. How would you ensure we also get the infrastructure that is needed? How are you going to provide the doctors? There's no doctor in this village, we need one. How are you going to provide the transport? There's a great many older people in this community and in the nation. You know, the demographics of the nation suggest that the people over 70 are larger than any other group. They're going to need public transport. They won't be driving their cars forevermore. So how are you going to look at transport and make sure that's where the houses are being built? How are you going to get a dentist? Do you remember those? How are you going to bring all that infrastructure to the housing that you propose? Because there's no point in having those houses if those people cannot live sustainable lives. Because oh, and the school, yeah, well, the school's full, you know.
Thank you. That's to Jason, first of all, please.
I quite agree with the lady. I think that all this house building is more thought of than actually dental surgeries, doctor surgeries, and, well, whatever we need. That's what we really want. But they're quite happy to take extra farmland, build a load of houses, and don't think of anything else apart from those little... Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. On to Ian.
I couldn't agree with you more. We need a holistic approach to communities.
I didn't give an opinion, I asked a question.
We raised an issue. And the housing issue links to so much. You talk about the facilities for health, social care, transport. I'm afraid all these things do require investment. And the major parties are a bit shy of talking about investment, raising tax. But we're not. We need to be raising a lot of money. And over 5 years, we will be spending 300 billion to try and address those issues that you talk about. So, you know, we're not talking about keeping tax low. It's got to go up, and it's got to deal with those issues. But housing itself, creating... I don't personally like to see these estate-type housing coming along. They themselves destroy habitat. And I think a much more selective approach to housing could be taken whereby we put small developments in places where they can be absorbed. But we must put the infrastructure alongside it, and that is a planning issue along with the funding. So we've talked before about planning needs to change, the funding and the planning need to go together.
Thank you very much. And on to Andrew.
Yes, I agree with the question, and what the question implies. And the problem is lack of strategic planning. In other words, the local plan that we have and the one that is imposed through the National Planning Policy Framework from national government is one that is fundamentally, I'll put it simply, a developer's charter, and one which I've described the planning system as fueled by greed rather than need. And if you have a system which actually encourages people to seek to enhance the land values of their land, and don't really need to worry too much about what necessarily goes on it, they simply need to. The planning system is there for them to maximise that land value. The whole system is skewed, and the planners themselves and the planning committees who have to operate within the extreme straitjacket that is sent down from central government and gives them virtually no latitude, and indeed a threat to them that if they turn planning applications down, they will lose on appeal and might even be surcharged for the pleasure of doing so. That actually is pretty much kind of central control that you must achieve the house building numbers. And we in Cornwall have been one of the fastest growing places in the United Kingdom in the last 60 years, as I've mentioned earlier. And so what needs to happen is we need to turn the whole thing around, whereby the plan is based on ensuring, as you rightly imply in your question, to have the infrastructure in place as you develop, and to make sure that you front load the system with the services necessary in order to satisfy the needs of the local population. We don't need as many houses in Cornwall because we can see how many are empty, and a large number of empty ones. I mean, Conservatives closed the empty homes unit at Cornwall Council to address the problems of empty homes. So we need to make sure that we make better use of existing properties in Cornwall and have the infrastructure in place in order to cater for it, as your question implies. So there's a great deal more which I think needs to happen. But above all, I think we need to be looking very seriously at development land tax, so that we get the development that we need, and that we tax the unearned income from those people who get the lottery win on their land when they secure the planning permission.
Thank you. On to John Howard.
It sounded like a very practical solution.
Mm-hmm. As you'd expect from me.
As I would expect from you. I'm delighted. You are the only constituency in the country that is being offered a candidate from the common people. The common people can only solve your infrastructure problems if you vote us in as a majority government. So we are some way short of that.
We can help you out if you like.
Right.
We'll work with you, it's okay.
We do actually have a manifesto commitment for when we make it as a majority Westminster government, which will solve exactly this problem, which is that we propose a national government infrastructure trunk line from Inverness all the way down as far as Salisbury Plain, with a 300-mile-an-hour train going back and forth along it in as many tubes as you need, and branches going off in each direction. And wherever you come across a town that's got 20,000 people, you build an underground town next to it, and you give it all the infrastructure it needs. You give it the schools, you give it the dentists, you give it all of the GP's practices, and it echoes with the one above ground. So you have an underground rail line, and it's not taking up the countryside. And as such, it is a green measure, and it's not taking away from where the farming is going to end up, which is wildlife conservation. So you can have your wildlife conservation, you can have your food security because you're going to transform all your farmers into wildlife conservancy experts instead, and you're going to be fed from
Fancy
factories.
that.
Because that's the only place that you can get a secure food source once climate change starts biting. Now, it will take us some years to get there. But I guarantee you...
How much is it going to cost?
Oh, I know, we're well beyond that. Every journey starts with a first. It does, and we guarantee you 500,000 homes a year for 20 years.
Okay, right.
Thank you very much. Did I go over the 2 minutes? I do hope so.
Strictly enforcing that on these questions. Thank you. And on to Dave.
Getting back to the lady's question about the houses. I think it was, yes. I believe that we should have a ratio. It's a balance again, as I was talking earlier. Everything's out of balance. The money's out of balance. The infrastructure's out of balance. And we need to get the youngsters back here living with subsidised housing. I believe that
Where are you going to get the doctors and the dentists and
by
buses
having
and the trains?
exactly by having a ratio of new houses to a surgery, a dentist and a school to start with. And these developers can't develop more than X number of houses without putting the infrastructure in first. Some of the profits must go into the infrastructure. We need to build communities. We don't just need to build houses. Houses are just a building. Without a person in it, it's a waste of time. We need to build little communities. Go back to the old ways, into the communities where people knew each other. People got on with each other. And we can do that by providing more schools, smaller, all this corporate stuff with all these people taking the lion's share of the money at the top end. It's wrong. It's not working. Everywhere you look, it's a limited company. Everything is a limited company. Even Boris Johnson's a limited company, actually. He's limited on the... So, it's all for a reason.
Don't blaspheme in a church building.
No. But what I'm saying is, your question is about the house, how are we going to get the infrastructure for the houses? So, the holiday homes, subsidised dwellings for the locals, the workforce, the experts who live here. We stop outsourcing out of the county. It's a combination of solutions. There's not one solution. Throwing money at it is not the end. Remanagement, the money is mismanaged. Remanagement of the money, reallocation of the money, and get the holiday homes to support the service industry that supports the holiday homes, and then the families will be here, the children will have a need for schools, and we have a ratio. Schools, surgeries, dentists to housing ratio. And I think that's the only way we're going to do it.
It's a good question. I spent the last 9 years wrestling with that very challenge, and then there's some really practical examples of how we address it. There has been a quiet transformation within how we deliver healthcare. I've always argued it should be as close to home as possible. You will have noticed over recent years that primary care networks have been set up. So Cornwall is now divided up into 5 areas of primary care networks where GPs and their practices have kind of worked together. And the idea is that they can use more specialist tools within their practices by just coalescing and collaborating better. I think there's room, so the Stenic would be a great example of how that can offer more, but I do accept the challenge about getting an appointment with a doctor or a dentist. In terms of what can be done, so one thing I worked on very early on, there's apprenticeships. Every company every employer that spends more than £3 million a year on staffing has to pay a levy for apprenticeships. The NHS in Cornwall used to hand that money back to the Secretary of State. Now what we did, and I worked closely with RCHT and Royal Cornwall Hospital Trust and Cornwall Foundation Trust, was to turn that levy into actually delivering apprenticeships within our hospitals and within our healthcare system. So now you can get employed as a healthcare assistant, train, your fees are paid, your work is paid, and you're given time to study, and you become a registered medical professional in that process. And so that's really helped in Cornwall. Hundreds of people locally have done that, not needing to leave their homes, not needing to go to university and accrue student debt. There's some really practical things to address the problems you said. NHS dentistry has been a problem for a long time. The contract is the problem. There's always the incentive to earn a lot of money doing a root canal, £1,000 or more doing a root canal, when actually the NHS only pay £150 for it. But in terms of how we address that, the Edward Hayne Centre is going to become a health and community hub, care hub. Within that, we're working with dentists in the area, with the the trustees, but also with commissioners, which are now in Cornwall. So that's another thing that's changed with dentistry. Dentistry is commissioned in Cornwall rather than in London. That's a change that has happened the last 18 months. So we are in the middle of plans, and I'll continue this if I'm successful on the 4th, to bring NHS dentists into Edward Hayne. Also in Helston, Shared Prosperity Funding has purchased the Budgeons building, the old co-op, and in that will be health and care services, which include greater access to primary care. I can't say much more than that, but there's already conversations, mature conversations around how that happens. In terms of the legislation that you're basically challenging us on, the Regeneration and Levelling Up Act, which would pass April 23, means that from now on, any development that is building houses that has every large development has to contribute to schools, has to contribute to community facilities, including, it depends on the council what they actually deliver, but there is requirements for to deliver stuff, to deliver for the infrastructure. That now has to be funded at the beginning. In the past, developers have done their development, argue they run out of money, and lots of those things fall away. With the legislation, all of that funding and that work has to be done right at the outset, and so there's no risk of that not happening. Otherwise, that planning application does not stay alive. So there's things that we're addressing. I would fundamentally accept, with the majority that the government has had, we could have addressed these issues much more quickly. It is very difficult with the size of the civil service at the moment to get things moving as quickly as it should. But we understand and recognise the problem, and are you telling me to be quiet? Is that what you're saying? But I can assure everyone here that getting access to care as close to home as possible is something I've grappled with, and there is more access to dentistry. I know it's very difficult for people that look for it, but one of the dentists under the new arrangement was able to offer 1,000 appointments to children in St Ives. The dentists in St Ives were able to offer 1,000 new appointments to new patients. The ledger, yeah, that might be true, but there's no. So we don't. So sorry, we don't. How do we say this? We don't say to a dentist where they have to offer their appointments from. Anyone can ask for that appointment, but there's much more to do, which is why I've been working with Edward Hayne to deliver NHS dentistry in that building.
Thank you. So I believe we're drawing to a close about 9:30, because that was correct. We have scheduled 1 minute from each candidate to close for closing remarks. I think if the candidates will allow, if you with hands up a number of times, one further question if candidates can agree to a 30-second response, perhaps. If that's possible. That'll be from the lady at the back over here. So a hand up all evening.
Currently, St Erth has 2 developments being done at the moment by developers. The developers are building directly on the existing property owners' boundaries, overlooking, overbearing. I would like to know whether these have been passed by the council. Secondly, no one's been in communication with anyone. And thirdly, how can you deal with this now and make them an example?
I think we're back to starting with Giane again for that response.
I don't know the details, unfortunately. But it sounds to me like you've got a very unsocial design. And for the life of me, I can't understand why planners would allow an unsustainable development in this day and age. We should be allowing for space, access, community involvement, plenty of consultation, and preferably a lower density. It could be smaller in units, but they should be lower density. So that would be my comment. It doesn't seem to me like a very environmentally friendly arrangement.
Thank you, Ian. Thanks for your time. Andrew.
Yes, well, we've met and we've discussed this, and I'm extremely concerned. And if they're flouting the plans that they were granted, that does need to be, that is a question of enforcement. I mean, within the 30 seconds available to me, I would simply say that, after the election, clearly the decisions on these matters are matters for the council. They have enforcement powers. I know that you've raised the matter with your Cornwall councillor, John Martin, who is extremely exercised about it. And I think the fact that you weren't consulted and weren't involved in the process of revising the planning permission to allow them to make the changes necessary, I think is a matter of extreme concern. So it does need to be investigated. The proximity of properties, there is clear guidance to kind of deal with that. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Of course, no.
I understand new MPs are given advice on how they deal with local affairs and local questions like this. If I get to that stage, I shall have a far better idea, but at the moment I don't.
Thank you. And Dave?
The problem you have is it's already done. How are you going to undo it? In my opinion, all new builds should have a minimum plot size and should be a minimum distance from all boundaries. Thank you.
1.5 metres is not enough.
It's nowhere near enough, absolutely.
Thank you. And Derek?
Well, we avoid that in the future by bringing back empty homes that I described earlier. But in terms of yours, I'm quite confident it is overlooking and overdevelopment, and I think it should be taken down. That particular building, and so if I'm successful on the 4th, I'll be working. I've already met with Mark Brumhead on it. I absolutely think that the council have got it wrong and the developers got it wrong, and that building should be put back to the bungalow that was passed originally.
So would you have the
demolish
power to
it,
do
yeah.
that?
Members of Parliament don't have the power to do that, no.
We don't have the power to say tear it down, but we have the work. We can work with communities and we can work to challenge planners about making the wrong decision, and we can work with, at the end of the day, a social landlord that wants to keep in favour with communities if they want to deliver. So I think there's absolutely the tools. There are many things that I don't get involved in whether a plan should be developed or not, but I certainly get involved in when policy that we set is not followed, and that's where you can get people to do the right thing with the policy sets out.
Okay, and we'll move on to Jason.
I really can't answer that question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So to close the evening, we will have closing remarks from each candidate. I'll ask 1 minute. I'll ask Chris to raise his hand at 1 minute again for me. So candidates about Chris will raise his hand at 1 minute. And we will start with Ian.
Oh, well, the concept I want to introduce to you, if you've not heard about it already, is the donut concept of the economy. When you buy something from my stall, I go home and I pay some staff, I buy some feed for the animals, and I repair hedges and buildings by paying people. All that money that you've given me at my stall stays in Cornwall. If you go and buy from the supermarket, profit goes out of Cornwall. If you buy electricity from EDF, the profit goes out of Cornwall. If you buy your water from South West Water, their profit goes into their shareholders' pockets, and it goes out of Cornwall. We have to address this problem of locality, and that's really all I've got to say. There's millions and millions leaching out of the county all of the time. We need to get to grips with it.
Thank you very much. On to Andrew.
Thank you. Well, the challenges that we have, particularly in relation to poverty, are immense, and I know that during the last 5 years, I've spent a lot of time, for example, volunteering with the Street Food Project and seeing people at the front line, if you like, of where our system is completely failing. And we need a complete change of values in this country, one away from kind of me, and greed and prejudice and fear, and one which is based on kindness and decency to people. And I mean, I said that the other day, and someone on the right of the spectrum kind of said, "No, we don't want kindness because that's weakness. We want to have strength." But the thing is that it's not weak to stand up to bullies. It's not weak to confront bigotry. It's not weak to challenge powerful vested interests. Kindness is a value which we do need to re-inject at the centre of politics.
Thank you. John.
Right. Nobody's brought up crime. There was a thing in the paper. Well, I don't have a paper. There was a thing on the BBC.
Do you want to share something with us, Susan?
There's a thing on the BBC News. There are no prison places left, it says. That's this week. Stop sending people to prison, for goodness sake. There's so many things that are criminalised that means organised crime can do it, but companies can't do it. There's no competition across the boundary. Decriminalise recreational drugs, for goodness sake. And then you won't have this problem. Decriminalise any number of things like that. And if you're going to take people to prison, at least you can rehabilitate them instead of just punishing them. Thank you.
Thank you. And on to Dave.
Thank you. Well, everywhere I look, there's systems that are broken, they need fixing, and it's not going to be easy, but we need to do it. This country's been broken before in the past, and a lot of people know how badly, and it has been fixed. The British people are damn good at that. They're good at fixing things. We need to fix the problems in our community, not being told by party politics from London what we should be doing down here. We should be telling them. The MPs in this area are paid by you. There's no such thing as government funding, it's taxpayer funding. So any MP is employed by you, not the government, so it should be you telling the MP what to do.
Thank you very much, Dave. And Derek.
And they do. So the extraordinary privilege of this job is to be able to work with people of any political interest or persuasion, but just to work to try and fix problems. So when you see new hospital extensions at West Cornwall, or where you see that I talked about Edward Hayne, the building work that's going on at Trellis, the building work that's going on at the Isle of Scilly Hospital, the investment that's going into our towns through the Towns Fund, we've done that by working with people and across whoever is involved in community leadership and the community is identifying what they want. That's a great, extraordinary privilege of doing this job. And we can address poverty in exactly the same way. There are a massive number of new apprenticeships right across West Cornwall in all sorts of really skilled jobs, including renewable, including food and farming, including engineering, for example. And that can be delivered by working with employers and working with leaders and trainers. And so I would really love the opportunity to continue to do that, because that is how we really address the challenges people face and give them a real future and a solid opportunity to live their lives to the full.
Will they do the apprenticeships after their military service?
I think we'll...
Let's talk about that after, because it's not been presented very well, that particular issue.
Please allow Jason to
My final closing issue is basically farming. Bring back our farming so farmers can produce as much as they want. Fisheries, take back control of our own waters and grounds when they was taken from the EU. Small businesses, help the small businesses, towns, villages, reduce the business taxation, lower business rates, lower taxation to create more jobs. That's basically what I can close on.
Thank you very much. So that draws to a close this evening's hustings at St Erth. Thank you very much to all the candidates for your time, and thank you everybody for coming, and Chris for hosting. And please do not forget our collection at the back for the name of the charity again, Chris? I'm very sorry.
In aid of Christians Against Poverty.
Christians Against Poverty, and I think these hustings was born out of a meeting members of the chapel discussing that exact issue. So please keep generous on your way out, and thank you for coming.
Well done, well done, well done.